Morning, everyone. I'm Alfred, and you are,
I'm Azan Marwah.
and we're talking about same-sex marriage today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's begin with what is same-sex marriage?
In the simplest way, it's a legalized or legally recognized marriage between two people of the same gender.
Why is it important?
Well, for the reason that marriage is important.
Marriage is important. Yeah, I agree with you.
And it really is that simple. How is it that people can receive equal treatment in their relationships with their families, with each other, and with the state, except by having their marriage recognized?
Yeah. A lot of people would disagree and say, "Oh, same-sex marriage break the traditional marriage value or the ethic, the core value, which is the union of one man and one woman."
Yeah, I really would strongly disagree with that. I think the core value that all people share is the belief that family is a fundamental part of society. And the truth is, there are all different kinds of families. There was a time when people would have said that a marriage between people of a different race or a different religion is against a core value. But really, those are aspects of prejudice.
Yeah.
And recognizing families, recognizing relationships in marriage only benefits society.
At the end of the day, marriage or family, it's about two people, at least two people, committing to each other to build something together. And in that respect, there might be children, there might be the relationship itself, or there might be the joint effort to accumulate the family wealth. That in the situation when there is disagreement, or even dispute, or even like dissolution, people need to be protected by the law. They need to know their right, their responsibility, so that everyone can have their fair treatment in this. And in that respect, I don't see why this kind of protection should only apply to heterosexual marriage, but not same-sex marriage.
Well, I think you've pointed to two different parts of law, which are really important. One of them is protecting relationships, and the other one is protecting people when relationships break down.
Yeah.
Protecting relationships, because those relationships are so important and valuable, because life is what it is, sometimes you hit speed bumps.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different areas in the law, tax, employment, insurance, medical, what happens when you die, that having the special protections for relationships enables those relationships to weather the storm.
Yes.
And it better protects everybody and their families when they go through difficulty. On the other side of that, what happens when relationships break down?
Yeah.
Really, family relationships, they are a kind of promise to one another that we're going to take care of each other. And the law, when those relationships breaks down, tries to protect people from what happens when those mutual supports disappear.
But why is it so difficult for people in same-sex marriage to get their protection? Why is the law not recognizing them?
Well, in Hong Kong, marriage has a really long and complicated history. Before the arrival of the British, we had Chinese customary law, which sometimes was recognizing same-sex marriage and sometimes it wasn't. But when the British arrived, they introduced the system of marriage based on Christianity. Initially, they were allowing non-Christian marriages to go along a parallel track. But then in 1970,
Marriage Reform Ordinance, right?
That's right. They changed the law and said, no, we're only going to recognize one kind of marriage, and that's what they call Christian marriage, or its civil equivalent. This meant, as you said before, one man and one woman exclusively for life.
And at the same time, they recognize the traditional marriage, including the what we call concubinage, or chief in Chinese.
Yes.
It's actually Chinese traditional marriage actually recognize more than two people getting married.
That's right. And that was against British policy.
Yeah.
So they wanted to phase that out.
Yeah.
And in 1970, 1971, they said, well, from now on, you can register your old customary marriages, but from now on, we're only going to recognize one man, one woman.
And even at that time, when they are recognizing customary marriage, there are certain rituals that the parties have to perform in order to get it properly recognized. It is not like, oh, the two people just live together and then the third party come along and then just have a dinner and everything is recognized. It's not that simple.
No, it wasn't that simple.
Yeah. So when we're talking about two people getting married, this is what we call, you say, traditional Christianity mentality. But in terms of the Chinese traditional culture, it's actually more liberal than that.
That's right. And Hong Kong, you can say, used to be a slightly more liberal place where there were different kinds of marriages based on different traditions. But historically, that system is the one that carried over to the handover, and it became, if you like, ossified as part of Hong Kong law.
Yeah.
But since 1991, something really important happened. The British government decided to introduce the Bill of Rights.
Yep.
The Bill of Rights introduced this concept of equality before the law and freedom from discrimination. When they did that, immediately they had to reckon with the contradiction of having laws against homosexuality. And very quickly they repealed aspects of the law that criminalized certain kinds of homosexuality.
That's when?
1991.
So 1991 is the first case that decriminalized same-sex with
Legislation.
legislation. It's legislation that decriminalized same-sex act.
Yes, specific kinds of,
Okay, all right.
particularly buggery.
Buggery, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we think at the time, certain kinds of other same-sex acts were probably also criminalized, but because of the Bill of Rights, those parts of the ordinances, they're interpreted differently now.
But it was only after many years that they started recognizing sort of same-sex marriage. Why does it take so long?
The first point would be to say that the political side of Hong Kong, there wasn't really any push to change the law positively, constructively, to deal with questions like same-sex relationships. So you had to have a few things happen. First, we talked about the Bill of Rights. The second thing that happened was you really had to have people come forward and put their hands up to say that the law was treating homosexual people different from other people. And the first one of those cases is the Billy Leung case.
Okay.
Billy Leung came forward and he said the age for sexual consent in Hong Kong for straight people is 16.
Okay.
But for homosexual people, it's 21.
Okay.
That effectively means that gay people can't have full relationships with their partners until they turn 21.
Unless they don't have sex.
Like I said, full relationships, unless they are willing to risk a prison. And Billy came forward when he was a teenager and said that he wanted to challenge that law. And the government, obviously, they pushed back. And only, I think, in 2007, Billy was successful in the Court of Appeal.
That was less than 20 years ago.
That's right.
Like almost more than 10 years after the legislation decriminalized the same-sex act, same-sex conduct. Yeah,
That's right.
buggery.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes so
No,
long.
I'm sorry. I correct that. I think it's 2003, 2004.
It was 2003 that buggery was decriminalized.
That's right.
It takes a long way.
Yeah. And after you have that, then you have more people stepping
Coming
forward
forward,
and saying we should be treated equally. And probably the first most important case is the case of W. W was a transgender person who wanted to marry in their proper gender.
Yep.
and they were refused a license to marry by the wedding registry.
Because W's birth certificate still register her as a he.
That's right.
And after that case, how did the law change in relation to recognizing same-sex marriage?
Well, the next big important thing to happen after that was a case called QT, where they weren't in a same-sex marriage, they were in a civil partnership from the UK. A couple of lesbians came to Hong Kong, and if you like, the trailing spouse said that she wanted to get a dependent visa. But the government said, no, you don't fall within our dependent visa policy because you are not married.
Okay.
And QT said, but I can't get married because I'm in a same-sex relationship.
Yes.
And the government said, well, this is part of our policy generally of protecting the marriage system in Hong Kong. Also, we can't be sure that same-sex relationships really have the same quality as straight relationships. And the Court of Final Appeal rejected that and said, no, straight families and LGBT families, they have the same quality of relationships, and those relationships really in substance are the same as marital relationships.
And this case, QT, is just like W, where the parties have to go all the way up to the Court of Final Appeal in order to get their ultimate victory.
That's right.
It's not an easy road, huh?
No, not at all. And the next case after that, which is Angus Leung's case, that's actually the first true same-sex marriage case because this couple had been married beforehand. That dealt with tax, but also with civil service benefits. In that case, that also had to go all the way to the Court of Final Appeal and took quite a deal of effort. But it does demonstrate that, on the one hand, the Court of Final Appeal is very willing to recognize the need to provide equal treatment for LGBT families. But on the other side, the opposition of the government to these cases.
If you can share with us, what's the main argument put forward by the government to resist the recognition of same-sex marriage and the equal treatment?
It depends on the area of law. But typically, the arguments are very few in number. Either they will be about practicality, the belief that, well, we know what the arrangement is for straight couples. Same-sex couples are somehow different, and that puts a burden on us. Now, that argument has almost no traction. The second argument they put forward is the need to protect traditional family.
We go back to that. How to protect same-sex, how to protect traditional marriage by refusing same-sex marriage.
That's right. And typically the courts have said, well, protecting traditional families, that's a perfectly legitimate aim. Traditional families should be protected. But then typically the court will say, but how does treating this group of people less well protect traditional families?
Should that be the case after all these cases and more cases that come forward, we're not going through all of them, how come Hong Kong still not recognizing same-sex marriage performed overseas in a blanket way?
Well, at the moment, it's fair to say that the legislation is written very clearly to provide only for heterosexual marriage. So you have to accept that the change that has to come either through new legislation or through the courts. Legislation is probably unlikely to happen because of the political decisions that have been made, which are pretty clearly against same-sex families. But on the other hand, the courts, they are happy to hear those cases. The difficulty, of course, is that every time you encounter a discriminatory treatment, you have to have another case, another applicant, and it takes time.
Even though actually there was some statistics or survey conducted a couple of years ago saying that more than half of the population support same-sex marriage.
And I'll do you one better and tell you that that there's another survey supposed to come out any day now, which is my understanding
Yeah.
is that it will show an even greater majority of Hong Kong people are supportive of equal treatment for same-sex couples.
And yet, the government there's no roadmap for the government to recognize same-sex marriage.
No, it is a difficult thing for them politically, but who knows? There is a lot of pull from society and obviously from other countries where there's rapid pace of change. I'm quite hopeful that eventually the government will consider this and implement legislation.
We hope we can see it one day.
Yes.
Yeah.
One day.
And I think there is one case that someone is challenging the government heads-on with the recognition of same-sex marriage as a whole.
That's right. So in fact, there were two recent cases. One of them called MK and the other one called STK. Or the STK case will be heard by the Court of Final Appeal any day now.
Okay.
Very, very soon, on the 28th of June. That considers whether or not the courts should require the government to provide equal status for foreign same-sex marriages. If that case is successful, that will effectively mean complete marriage equality. If the case is not successful, then it does not necessarily mean there's not equality. It just means that equality will take a lot longer and it will happen piece by piece.
It's strange enough that the court fixed that hearing, a very important hearing, in June, the Pride Month.
Well, it was chosen some time ago, so I think they did it intentionally.
Obviously, a lot of people then ask that question. Since the same-sex marriage is not recognized in Hong Kong anyway, why get married?
Well, I would first say that same-sex marriages are recognized in Hong Kong for certain purposes. And those purposes are really valuable and they can be significant. The first one is those cases that have already come.
Yeah.
So there are cases dealing with inheritance,
Yep.
dealing with arrangements when you die, taxation, employment benefits, visas. I could go on. And in all of those cases, the courts have said there has to be equal treatment.
Yeah.
If you are not already in a same-sex marriage that's been performed, then you can't have access to any of that automatic protection that's provided.
There are actually very practical reasons to get married. For example, stamp duty. If a couple actually owns a property together as joint tenant, and they wanted to decide to benefit with the first purchase lower stamp duty, what they can do is to transfer the interest to one another, and they can claim the spousal relief for a lower tax rate. That actually is a very good incentive already. The second part, of course, is inheritance. With the recognition of same-sex marriage in the intestacy rules, at least that provide some basic protection to the survivor of a couple who received the inheritance and protect the accumulation of wealth in the course of their relationship. So there are actually very good reasons to get married. And not to mention that because same-sex marriage cannot be performed in Hong Kong, that necessarily means that it has to be a destination wedding. Why not have a party?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Well, in fact, I would go further. You use the example of stamp duty.
Yeah.
Stamp duty was a change that occurred without us even bringing a case.
Yes.
And it occurred because of the other cases that had happened. So you will have increasingly benefits that aren't being provided right now, but will be provided in the future because of the cases that are being done, even when we're not bringing a specific case on that issue.
Yes, but all this benefit only arrive after people like Angus, who we know very well, are willing to take on the government and challenge the status quo. And that case, I remember very clearly, how many years did it take for them to, from this beginning all the way to the Court of Final Appeal?
The decision in the Court of Final Appeal, I think, is 2019.
Yeah.
My case file for Angus I think they got married in 2014,
Yeah.
and my case file for them starts, I think, in 2015,
God.
early 2015. So
So
it
was
takes 5 years.
5 years. After 5 years, after spending millions of dollars, not only from Angus' side, but also from the government side, and actually because Angus is protected by legal aid, the government literally sponsoring these cases both ways.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to get a very, very small achievement in terms of tax and in terms of tax, right?
Yeah.
So, why the government is still so adamant?
Well, there's some good news and bad news. The good news is they are running out of argument.
Yeah.
They run out of arguments.
Okay.
The bad news is that we have to find people willing to put up the sacrifice and go through the heartache
Yes.
of these cases.
Yes.
And I tell you honestly, my heroes in Hong Kong are Edgar Ng, Henry Lee,
Oh, absolutely.
Angus Leung,
Yeah.
Scott Adams,
Yeah.
Billy Leung.
Yeah.
You know, these are people who put their time,
Absolutely.
put their hearts on the line
Yeah.
to make a difference for other people.
Absolutely. And in the course of these battles, it's not only the money side, it's also the pressure and how the people around you see you, knowing that you are doing this, and not to mention how the employer sees you, how it's going to jeopardize your career.
Yeah, there is some positive protection that can be put in place for people like that.
Yeah.
We talked already about MK.
Yeah.
We talked about QT.
Yeah.
All of these people, the reason why we call them by these acronyms
Yes.
is because we applied to the court for protections for their names.
Anonymity order.
That's right. That's right. And those are things there are things that can be done to protect people who come forward to bring these cases. In the past, people have donated legal costs to help people bring forward the cases. So it is difficult. It does take a lot of time.
Yeah.
But the rewards are
Yeah.
huge. And I've met people now in the last year. I've met people who have married because of Angus's case or because of Henry's case. So I would say there are benefits that you don't even see.
That's very encouraging.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant topic. We can carry on for like hours, but
I have to go home eventually.
let's wrap it up today, and we'll see you talk about another thing next time.
Okay, thanks.